When will Von Miller be ready? What else should we be mindful of from the Buffalo Bills when it comes to injuries in 2023? We're getting caught up on the team from an injury perspective today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, you know, we talk all about skill sets and players and what they can do on the field, but it's always been said that your best ability is availability. And so today we're going to focus on that ever important component of being a football player and get caught up on the health of the Buffalo Bills as we come out of the offseason. We're 6 weeks away from training camp, and I want to have an understanding of where this team is from a health perspective. And you know who we're talking to today. It's Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills, a very regular guest here on the podcast. He always gets us caught up when it comes to injuries on a weekly basis during the season, getting ready for games, but also we like to check in during the offseason. And so today is that opportunity to get caught up on everything. Von Miller, Dalton Kincaid's back. What's up with Jordan Phillips? Should we be concerned about Deontay Hardy's turf toe? All of it is coming your way today on Locked On Bills. Dr. Kyle Trimble, welcome, my guy.
Joe, it is great to be back and talking with you on the program.
All right, well, let's get right to it. The question on my mind, and I'm sure the question on everyone's mind, is Von Miller. When's he coming back? And I'll tell you what, he's hyping it up. He's talking like week one's a possibility. We heard Brandon Beane say that week one is a possibility. Everybody knows where I stand. I think it's week 6. I think that he starts the year on the PUP list, and they don't want to deal with the London game in week 5. Week 6, Giants, Sunday Night Football in Buffalo. That's when I think we see him. Where are you? I mean, this guy's 34 years old. He's coming off of an ACL tear. I mean, it's 9 to 12-month recovery. Ground us here, Dr. Kyle Trimble. Get us in the know here.
Exactly. He's an internal optimist. It's awesome that he wants, he can go. He thinks he can do it. He did that 10 years ago, which is why he's talking like that. If some guys can get back and do great like they did, fine. But we're looking at the exception, not the rule. Most guys take a lot of time. In fact, when I did the article back at my site, it takes guys roughly 11 and a half months to get back from a defensive end standpoint. There are guys that come back very soon, as soon as like 8.5 months, or they take even longer because there's a lot of different variabilities with that. But the average was about 11 months, give or take, a few weeks there. So for him to come back and say, week one, yeah, okay, fine, did that 10 years ago, but can we expect he's going to do that 10 years older? Hey, I want it just as much as you do, but I was on this program last year talking about Travis White is going to be ready week 1. He's working real hard. They talked about him working hard in the dark and whatnot, and then we saw him have that delayed return back there. So common sense and research suggests that he's going to be back later than week 1. He said no later than week 6, which would be in line with what you said, and that would fit in line with what PUP would be if he starts the season on PUP. So if there's going to be a player that beats that time frame, it could be Von Miller. I mean, we saw Adrian years ago. We've seen other players do that and have successful careers afterward. But common sense says he's going to miss the first few weeks there and slowly ease him in because they need him last year during playoffs and they didn't have him. That's the softest stretch of games, that first 6 or 7 games there. So I want him to prove me wrong. Then, if he's gonna get the week 1, fine. I'll take the L. I mean, that's those are in the long run there. So,
well, Von Miller, for as much as he does hype up week 1, he does have some moments where he is grounded with his comments, where he says, look, I trust the organization. I trust Brandon Beane. I trust Sean McDermott, Nate Bresky. I trust Eric Washington that, that we're going to have the right plan here. And this team really missed Von Miller late last year. I mean, that's when they signed him for those late season games for the playoffs, and he wasn't around. I don't think you do anything that's going to jeopardize you not having Von Miller as close to Von Miller, as he could possibly be when he's back on the field. I don't think there's any reason to rush this, especially with Leonard Floyd now in the mix, and the importance of Von Miller. I mean, I want him as soon as possible, but what I really want is Von Miller to come back and be Von Miller. And I think that right there is a concern, right? I mean, 34 years old, ACL recovery. I mean, he even said in his most recent press availability that, look, you're not even right until 2 years, right? That's really the moment
absolutely.
where you're fully back. We're talking, I mean, we got to be real here. Although, like you mentioned, he is the eternal optimist.
We saw it with Travis White even last year. We knew back he wasn't going to be looking right, and he didn't look right. And people were, oh, well, he's washed up, or other people are just saying different stuff about him. And then in spring here, he's looking great. I mean, I've seen the video. He's looking very crisp. All the beat reporters are saying that there. So, yeah, that fits in line with what Vaughn said with you're not even right till after year 2. And we're seeing, Travis White come back in year 2 and starting there. For Vaughn, I'm also worried about if he does try rush back, does he have some type of compensation injuries, such as a groin injury or hamstring, calf, quad? That stuff isn't well defined in the literature, but anecdotally, we do see that. And a lot of times you see guys who are trying to move around, trying to push it, and they just overexert themselves, and then they're on the sidelines for a hamstring injury or something that just set them back, and they're always kind of something not able to play their best there. So even looking at it from a roster management standpoint, hey, if he can free up a roster space so you can get somebody else over there, and then if you need to do, juggling stuff when he needs to come back and this and that, then fine. But I'm sure he wants to play. I know he's a competitor. That's what it's going to make him a Hall of Famer. But at the same time, too, look at the long term and the long game, because you might need Von Miller in the second half of the season when everybody else is banged up and he's, still coming off the field relatively fresh.
Yeah. All right. I want to ask you about Dalton Kincaid. Bill's first round pick, and obviously we're all excited about what he can mean for this offense. But he had a back procedure, right? Like he missed time. He missed the Senior Bowl. I get nervous about back injuries, man. I just really do. I know there was another tight end that had some back problems, wound up being pretty good there, Rob Gronkowski. But what's your level of concern here, and what can you tell us about Dalton Kincaid in that back? I mean, obviously the Bills felt good enough to invest a first-round pick and trade up to get him. Like I'm not sure it's like a huge problem, but I mean, I'm admittedly a little bit concerned and curious what you have to say about it.
So, yeah, Kincaid, he suffered a back injury late in the season when they're playing Colorado in the regular season, because they played him in the Pac-12 championship. Or he played that game and missed a game, and then played, I think, the Pac-12 championship, and then missed the bowl game there. So he was up and down, and what had happened is he suffered a back fracture. They didn't say exactly what, but based off the video that I was able to find and just the timeline and everything else like that, it strongly suggests that he suffered a compression fracture. And Dane Brugler in Athletic clarified this. It was a thoracic compression fracture. He didn't say compression fracture, but it was in the thoracic area, which clued me in further compression fracture. So what happens is compression fracture is when the vertebral body, the part that basically allows you to stand upright, that big, donut shaped bone, part of the bone in the vertebrae, that becomes cracked there. So it's kind of like there's like a dent in it almost, where it doesn't break off. Like there's times where it can, but in this case, it didn't break off, where it required a surgical procedure to kind of restabilize it there. But what happened is it probably cracked. He probably didn't realize anything was happening until it was this back pain that wasn't going away. They do imaging and find that, hey, there's an issue with that. So they shut him down, let things heal up, and get him back up to speed. And that's where it took him about 4 months, because it happened in late November and he wasn't cleared till about April there. So this type of injury we typically see in older individuals, osteoporosis. They go bending forward and they feel a pop, crack, and they find that they broke their bone in there. And sometimes it doesn't take much in older individuals to do that kind of stuff. Dalton Kincaid had a defender fall on him and his knees got flexed up. So that sudden flexion, that forced flexion, can cause a compression fracture in younger individuals. And of course, traumatic events just more aggravated contribute to that too, but that's not the case here. So they really just need to wait for things to heal back up. And, he's been cleared. He said he'd knock the rust off, but I have almost zero concern with this. And I say almost zero concern because he's a football player. He can suffer further injuries, but I don't believe anything regarding this back injury should linger into next season there. Everything's looking pretty good from that standpoint. And it's just a matter of just being mindful. If he does have a soreness in the area, make sure you get imaging and, shut him down or manage it properly instead of trying to work through things there. Because sometimes stress fractures can occur for other reasons. Make sure the nutrition stays up so the bones stay healthy. They're going to be on top of all that stuff, but just be proactive instead of reactive. But from the back injury standpoint, there's really no concern. It's just whether, he has other injuries, and just be mindful of that. So I will say that the back injuries, if people coming into the NFL from the college level when they're drafted, back injuries lead to shorter lifespan in terms of career by like 0.3 years, it said, but those are including with effusions, disectomies, more serious stuff like we saw Rob Gronkowski, Spencer Brown, things like that. So Kincaid falls into that timeline there, and he should at least get through, his rookie contract and hopefully then some. But I don't foresee him having problems unless something new comes up.
Exactly what I was hoping you would say. All right, I'll put those concerns to rest. I certainly didn't have that level of understanding of what the problem was and what the consequences are, but from your explanation there, seems like something of very little concern. All right, in just a moment here, we're going to talk about Jordan Phillips. Very curious about that rotator cuff, Deontay Hardy, and the turf toe. There's some concerning elements there potentially. We'll find out. But first, I need to tell you about FanDuel. Make your way to FanDuel because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if that first bet doesn't win. And I love betting over at FanDuel. You get great promotions every single day. It's a safe, secure, and easy-to-use app. You get paid instantly. And right now, you can get in on some football's futures bets. So whether it's over-under for win totals projected for teams, the player props when it comes to passing stats, rushing stats, receiving stats, the awards, so much fun stuff to get in over at America's #1 sportsbook. So check it out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get that no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Kyle, a couple more players that I want to ask you about is, the next one here, Jordan Phillips, Bills defensive tackle, banged up all season, man. And he's been banged up for like 3 years in a row. Hamstrings have been a problem, but the big one right now is the shoulder, right? Rotator cuff surgery. We watched him try to play late in the season. I mean, good Lord, it was an absolute grind. I mean, he literally had no functionality of one of his arms. He's out there trying to play defensive tackle in the National Football League. Where are you at with Jordan Phillips? How concerning is this trend? And in particular with the shoulder, I mean, I think it's like a 6-month recovery from that. I mean, is he a guy that we feel like is going to be ready to go this year?
He should be. I mean, he's been out. I haven't seen any rehab. In fact, we didn't even know when he had the surgery until Brandon Beane came out and said that he had surgery, and he started kind of working the time frame back from when he was out of a sling versus when he was in the sling. Though we didn't even see any of that. He's on. Not posting every single thing about his life on there. So you start kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together and you figure out that he had the surgery sometime in, right after the season, early February, which should put him on track for training camp. I know that Brandon B there was potential he could start on the PUP list. He mentioned that with Von Miller, who we just spoke about. And I don't know. I think they're just waiting to see how the rehab goes with that. And obviously he didn't practice during the OTAs, which was expected this time there. So with the rotator cuffs, I mean, you have the 4 different muscles in the rotator cuff, and they all kind of envelop over the head of the humerus and help depress the humerus to help you move around and work on all the different muscles, actually the motions of the shoulder, your throwing motions up overhead, just really anything that your body has to do with the shoulder there. So when the rotator cuff tears, the part of the muscle belly tears, or where the tendon attachment tears at, they have to go resurgically repair things there. So they kind of put anchors in and sew things back up and tie it down tight there. So it's a long, tedious process. Like I said, it could take 6 months. I've worked with rotator cuffs to take, longer than a year. It just depends on how severe and what associated damage is in there. So he has to work the range of motions, look at the strength back up. And it's not even just strength for your normal activities, but he has to go back to doing NFL things, throwing guys around. So which, sometimes we see a longer timeline because it depends on the size of the tear, which could determine how long that recovery time is. So I don't really have any two concerns with him. The rehab, when you're coming back with that, was looking pretty good from an NFL standpoint. Outcome measures up to 95%, but re-tear rates are up as high as 20% in the literature, but relatively lower in younger patients. So we don't know how significant the tear was, which could play a part in the rehab timeline. But if he does start in PUP, I don't foresee him staying long on the PUP. It might just be, hey, let's make sure we hit certain benchmarks and make sure you can pass the physical. But once he gets back out there, he should be good to go. We saw that with John Feliciano several years ago. He tore his rotator cuff, played the entire season with it, and then came back next season. And I didn't see any performance drop off.
All right. So that's good. Now, hopefully those hamstrings can stay healthy as well. That's been like a 3-year issue. And it's unfortunate. He got that one last year. It was on an interception, right? He was just running down the field trying to block.
Matt Milano interception week 2.
Man, you hate that. Okay, so look, you're making me feel better and better. Here we go. All right, what do you have on Deontay Hardy? Bills signed this wide receiver from the Saints, 3-year contract that they can get out of after one season. But, I mean, he had a pretty significant battle with turf toe, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know, I've seen some data on that doesn't tell a good story about how guys recover and what level of athleticism they're able to maintain. And so looking to you to set the record straight here on what I need to know about Deontay Hardy and turf toe.
All right. Hardy, he's been beat up a whole lot. I mean, he had an all-pro season his rookie year with the Saints, and then he's battled hamstring injuries left and right, I think just about every year, except for last year, which he had the right turf toe injury in week 5. He went to season-ending injury reserve. At the time, they did not state that he had surgery. It wasn't known until he had his opening press conference with the Bills. And then that's what had me digging into, hey, let's look into this a little bit further with that. So turf toe usually is more of a in-season thing where it's a troublesome thing, but then guys get healed up and then they're fine after that. But when you're dealing with the surgery stuff, most recently, I should say, Patrick Mahomes had that when we played them in the AFC title game in the 2020, and then he got surgery. And of course, he's still Patrick Mahomes. But going off the turf toe and what you mentioned about the performance after that, the research shows that I believe it's about 80%. 80% of players who undergo surgery return to play the following season. However, performance is decreased following the procedure with only 27% return to their prior levels. Now, that sounds scary, but reading off my article over bangedupbills.com, return to prior level performance was defined as a player's post-injury statistical performance exceeding 80% of his pre-injury statistical performance. This was achieved by carrying players' most relevant injury statistical categories from the season before treatment for turf toe to the season following treatment turf toe. Well, we know that Deontay Hardy has been mostly special teams. He's had his fair share of offensive performance when there's been injuries to the New Orleans Saints there. But the fact that he's coming back off the surgery, it's good that most guys can come back and play. Now, what that benchmark was in 2020, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I don't know that he's going to be the primary focal point in the Bills offense to begin with. So do we need him to perform at pre-level of statistical performance as he did before if he's only working from a punt return specialist there? I'm not as concerned. I mean, if he can get out there and run and pass the physical, I'd say he's okay with all that stuff. It's just a matter of, are we worried about statistical performance, and does he fit with that, other percentage of players who don't meet that benchmark? Or are we looking at just, hey, he needs to come back and play? I'm leaning more toward he needs to come back and play. If he gets any offensive performance, participation, great, but get out there and do what you do best and return, punts and kicks there. So I'm not too concerned about it. We've seen the procedures get better and better, but that is something to be concerned about in case there's other issues. But I don't think their re-injury rates were too bad for this one is all.
All right. Well, and maybe the answer here is just being, he's a small player, very, very small. You probably want to be choosy with his utilization, like you mentioned there. And, one of my big questions about the team has been between this mix of Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, and Deontay Hardy, like what type of volume do they command? And maybe you just appreciate Hardy for what he does offer, but he's just not going to be as high volume of a player. And I think that works out perfectly fine based on the landscape of what the Bills have at wide receiver. All right, here in just a moment, we are going to talk about PUP candidates. We're going to talk about Kyle's top injury concerns for 2023 right after a very, very quick break. Folks, my guest today is Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills. You can follow him on Twitter at Banged Up Bills, and you need to follow him on Twitter. Just last week, my guy is scouring through hundreds of photos from minicamp, putting pictures on the timeline of compression sleeves and talking about why that sleeve might be there and the concern. I mean, if you want to be the best Bills fan that you can be, you got to be following Kyle Trimble, because the information that you provide is awesome. And so a thank you for what you do, because I learned so much by keeping up with your work and obviously the conversations that we have here on the podcast. So let's shift gears to the PUP candidates. And I think we maybe hit on a few of them, but let's first establish what PUP is, how you get on PUP, because you don't just put players on PUP. If you could pass a physical, you can't go on PUP, right? That's something that we need to clarify. So if you can give us what we need to know about PUP, and then let us know what players, when the Bills report to training camp here in late July, what names should we be potentially mindful of that could start training camp on the PUP list?
Two big ones that we know of right now are Von Miller. He thinks he can avoid PUP altogether, but I say get him on PUP and work back in. Now, when you're on PUP, you can be around the team. You can't do any, team drills, anything like that. You always work off to the side. So once you clear physical, or you pass physical, then you can no longer go on PUP. There is also non-football injury, such as if you suffer an injury outside the training facility and you're not ready for the season, you can place on that. Same rules, you can stay on that until you pass physical. So Von Miller, I expect him to start on PUP. If he doesn't, I don't know, maybe the hand of God touched him and he's all better. So that's one I do expect to be on there. Jordan Phillips, possibly, only because Brandon Beane mentioned that. Jordan Phillips had said that he should be ready for training camp, but things can and do happen. I know Jordan Phillips is out there golfing and doing all the things that he needs to. He's been rehabbing off to the side during OTAs, but we'll wait and see what happens if he does start on PUP. I don't foresee him being on there long if he does start on there. So there's certainly other guys that if they come in, with some type of football injury that we didn't know about maybe during OTAs, they could end up on there. That's a possibility, but we don't have any public knowledge of that as of right now. So those are only two guys that we see for PUP. And then, once they do come off a PUP, they can't go back on. And then the rules change with injury reserve and whatnot. So if they're put on injury reserve before the cut down day, they either have to stay on injury reserve the entire season or get injury settlement and then get cut. Or if they want to be on injury reserve for the regular season, they have to make the roster and then be placed on the injury reserve. And then they have to serve their minimum 4 games. And then even if guys do make the PUP list and go all the way through to roster cutdowns, they have to sit on the PUP list for the first 4 weeks until they can get cleared and they can activate their training window, go from there.
Okay, so not a very robust list. I feel pretty good about that. But let's really kind of open up the floor here. We're talking about the 2023 Buffalo Bills Super Bowl aspirations. Health is going to be a big part of that. I think it's as big of a reason why the Bills didn't win the Super Bowl last year was health, right? I mean, whether it was Micah Hyde, Josh Allen playing through the elbow, Von Miller, obviously. I mean, Daquan Jones missed that Bengals playoff game. I mean, the guys were playing hurt. Jordan Phillips is trying to play with one arm. Really, there was some attrition last year when it comes to the injury front. And so when you consider this team, the goals that they have, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about when it comes to the 2023 Bills from an injury perspective?
Just trying to find what they had those first few years when they really weren't dealing with injuries. I mean, they dealt with injuries, but not to the volume that they did last year. And the fact that they still went 13-3 and won a playoff game, despite everything that they went through, is impressive. But I don't expect that to happen again and again and again. Eventually, at some point, the wheels are going to fall off. So just find a way to reduce the volume of injuries. If they did anything wrong in terms of, taking care of the injuries, at least from what we know of. I know they hired a new athletic trainer who was an athletic training intern with them previously, so they have that continuity with the training staff. They're doing whatever they can to get these guys ready, and they're being mindful of any injuries now. We saw Dawson Knox get injured during Tuesday's OTAs. It sounded like either knee or calf contusion, and they kept him out. Like, they're not having guys try practice who shouldn't be out there, at least early on right now. So they're being mindful about things and just trying to be proactive about giving the guys the time to rest and recover, especially with that 17th game, in the past few years. So there's not anything one particular player I'm worried about. It's just that overall volume and just looking to see that reduce. But hopefully that comes back to the mean for the overall injuries, because I was towards the extreme in terms of the amount of injuries we saw last year.
One thing, and I'm not sure if you caught this, but in listening to Sean McDermott in one of his press conferences pretty close to the season, once the season was over, he talked about part of his offseason regimen was studying injuries and being mindful of different trends at positions. And he brought to everyone's attention, he's like, well, look at the defensive line position. We had like a very strange amount of calf injuries. I mean, like, how do you even reckon what is he looking at that's going to tell them, hey, we did these activities and that maybe contributed to an uptick in calf injuries amongst this position group? Like, I'm fascinated by that.
I was fascinated by it too. I even did look into it. There was only 6 instances of calf injuries last year. You had Tim Settle, who suffered injury in the preseason. He missed most of the second half of the preseason and then was relatively okay for the first beginning, but he definitely had a slow start. Then you had Boogie Basham late in the season, Ed Oliver late in the season, Daquan Jones missed that playoff game, and then Eli Ankou missed the first 2 weeks of preseason with a calf injury during the training. So I don't know what they're looking at that said, okay, why are calf injuries more of a concern than maybe the hamstrings, which do happen at a higher rate, though that's reflected in literature as well. I'm not sure what they're doing training wise or whatnot, but I'm glad they're at least looking at it, because when you're at that level, just trying to say, let's look at overall injury reduction. They've figured that stuff out to the best of their abilities. And now let's try to fine tune things to try to minimize specific injuries. So good on them to at least realize that's an issue, and they're going to try to reduce it for next year.
Yeah, high stakes professional football. You got to be looking at everything. And yeah, there was just this weird concentration of calf injuries. So I'm glad that they're trying to figure out why or what contributing factors may have led to it. So always love hearing about those nuances that goes into running a football operation. So Dr. Kyle Trimble, we kept you way too busy last year. All right. I mean, let's chill out a little bit or a lot of bit this coming season. Let's have easy conversations this time around. I know that there's not much that you and I can do to control that, but here's all the good vibes towards that. I do appreciate you coming in here, middle of the summer here. And obviously we'll talk to you quite a bit here coming up this fall.
Joe, you're not the first person to made that comment, and I agree with you 100%. It would be great for my family, my sanity, everything else like that. But I do love coming on here. I do love writing and talk about the injuries. So it's a necessary evil, but I am hoping there's some good juju out there that reduces the injury frequency for the Bills this year.
All right, my guy. Appreciate you coming on here. Hope the chickens and the family are doing well. I know you've acquired some additional chickens. I keep up with you on the Instagram. I know what's going on there in the Trimble household. There's farm fresh eggs every day. I'm sure of it.
Absolutely.
All right, my guy. Hey, thanks to everyone for joining me today. And I'm really excited about the content that we have coming the rest of the week. Earlier this week, we compared the Bills to the rest of the AFC East. And starting tomorrow, we're going to compare the Bills to the other top contenders in the AFC. You know who those teams are, the Chiefs and the Bengals. That'll be really fun. So make sure that you come on back, hit that subscribe button, and would love it if you took a second to rate, review, share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.